Thanks for joining us again. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. We begin with the political turmoil has risen in Scotland after its First Minister and National Party leader Humza Yousaf resigned, triggering the search for a successor and a new First Minister. He also goes down in history as the shortest-serving Scottish National Party leader. The move comes shortly after Humza Yousaf ended the ruling coalition between the SNP and the Scottish Greens that triggered two no-confidence votes put forward by opposition parties that Yousaf looked likely to lose. Mr. Yousaf has been First Minister for just over a year. He assumed office in 2023 after the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon. During his resignation speech, he called for a leadership contest to find his replacement as soon as possible. However, he is expected to remain in power until then. He admits to have clearly underestimated the hurt he'd caused the Scottish Greens by ending the SNP's power-sharing deal with them in the way that he did. It's not clear, however, who's likely to replace him, but they will be the seventh person to hold the position to First Minister since the Scottish Parliament was established in 1999. Staying in Europe, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says he will not be resigning after all, but will continue in office even with more strength after a period of reflection. Sanchez had shocked the country last Wednesday when he announced he was taking 5 days off to think about his future after a court opened preliminary proceedings against his wife, Begoña Gomez, on corruption allegations. Last week, a court opened an initial inquiry into his wife over corruption claims, allegations he called a harassment campaign orchestrated by Spain's rival conservative political forces. The 52-year-old has been in power since 2018. He surprised the country when he said he was taking time off to reflect on whether or not he would be resigning. The prospect of Sanchez's resignation has sparked some turmoil, with demonstrations organized both for and against him. Thousands of Socialist Party supporters took to the capital, Madrid, on Sunday to show their support for the Prime Minister. Protesters held Spanish flags and banners reading, "Do not give up, for the love of democracy, and you are not alone." We're in the United States now, where at least 4 people have died, including a 4-month-old baby, after multiple tornadoes hit the central state of Oklahoma. A 5th person died from injuries in Iowa after a separate storm system hit the Midwest. The disaster also left at least 100 people injured. The storms, which swept from Texas to Missouri, also saw up to 7 inches of rainfall in some places within hours. The windstorm wreaked massive havoc in the state, destroying residential buildings and vehicles. A state of emergency has been declared in a dozen counties across the U.S. Tens of thousands of residents are left without power. The National Weather Service says a preliminary investigation confirmed some of the tornadoes and gusts of above 136 miles an hour.
It was really bad. It was pretty scary. We were just sitting down here in the tornadoes, getting the dogs in the room. It was just really bad.
There's been a significant amount of damage throughout this town, and even throughout the entire path of the destruction, there was multiple tornadoes that touched down yesterday, I believe 14. I forgot the exact number. You know, I hope everybody comes together and figures a way out of this. It's going to take a lot of work, that's for sure. For sure, it's going to take a lot of work to get this stuff back together and any sort of resemblance to what it was. But Oklahoma's strong, right? America's strong. We'll figure it out.
Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now via Skype audio. Maria, we're learning at least 70 tornadoes passed through the Midwestern states. Was there any warning for this storm?
Well, it was expected on Friday that there would be some tornadoes. I don't think that it was expected that we would see 70 tornadoes hitting through that region. As you know, that's a very vast region. If you talk about from Texas all the way to Missouri, it was 47 million people that were in the area of impact. So that's quite a large percentage of the population of America as a whole. And what we do know, as you heard earlier, that people were definitely devastated by what happened. and it took out whole downtown areas in Oklahoma. So for Oklahoma, for example, was the whole downtown community was flattened. And so we know it's going to be quite a rebuilding process for many communities in Iowa, Oklahoma, Nebraska, some of these very hard-hit parts of the Midwest.
So we're looking at pictures from Oklahoma, the devastation there caused by the tornadoes. But what about the other U.S. Midwestern states, Iowa, Arkansas? What's the situation there?
So Iowa is definitely experiencing some aftermath of it. There were heavy rains and hail that was exhibited as well throughout that entire region, even if it was not in a hard hit directly having a tornado hit. Typically, if a tornado is hitting an area, the circumference of that is about maybe a couple blocks of that tornado, and so you wouldn't necessarily see an entire city engulfed in one tornado. So that's why you see so many of the tornadoes that actually happen in pretty rapid form. And so people were taking shelter into their homes, staying below their basements, areas to try to ensure that if their home was knocked down, that they would be in a safe location. Because as you mentioned, there were some unfortunate loss of life as a result of these tornadoes. But those other regions really felt mostly hail, rain, extreme wind conditions, and obviously some minor damage to properties.
These are some really serious damages that we're seeing on our screen. And clearly, some people have lost all of their lives' belongings. Some have lost businesses as well. It's going to take some time, Maria, for the recovery process to kick in. But what usually happens in situations like this, how does the recovery begin?
So the recovery will first be focused on people. It'll first focus on the recovery of any individuals that could be trapped in some of the buildings that have been knocked down, some of the homes that have been completely devastated. So that'll be the first efforts. And then for those who are now experiencing homelessness because their properties and their homes are flattened, being able to provide emergency homes and emergency care facilities for those individuals. So that'll be the first call of action. The president will likely be putting in place FEMA very quickly. We know that there's been state of emergencies filed by Oklahoma, Nebraska, and those states that were heavily hit. Oklahoma, for one, the governor said he's never experienced or seen this type of damage in Oklahoma from tornadoes. So that's going to be the first area, and there will likely be FEMA on the ground for many months. It's going to be not an overnight process for cleanup. It'll be a rebuilding process, and it is, even though this is extremely devastating, the U.S. has definitely had to put efforts in place before for these type of disasters.
Maria, I noticed that most of the buildings are made up of wood, lots of wood there. Is this because of the terrain? Is this because, this is in the path of tornadoes in the United States? Will the recovery be easier if, it was this, or if people had built with bricks and stones?
So you're noticing something I think that's going to come into play as they begin to talk about the rebuilding. You're exactly correct. There's many wood. If you also notice, a lot of the buildings and properties are very low. You don't typically have multi-story homes in those regions. They're typically one-story homes because of that, because of the terrain in the region and because of the weather conditions that unfortunately have higher probability of tornadoes in those regions. And so they will probably likely have to consider how they're going to be rebuilding, but that is the traditional way in which those communities are built because, as you said, of the weather conditions.
Will there be more storms ahead?
Well, the hope is that this is the end of it, but again, the meteorologists are watching to see, because a lot of times you'll have these types of occurrences where you'll see several tornadoes or several storm paths in a region because right now we're experiencing extreme heat and extreme cold. And so when you have these extreme temperatures at unexpected times, and you're seeing cities go from one day could be 50 degrees, the next day could be 80 or 90 degrees in just a 24-hour period. That is what causes some of this atmospheric pressures that cause these tornadoes. And so with the extreme temperatures, it is a probability we could see more storms, even though there's nothing that they see in the path in the immediate future.
Thanks, Maria, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
Well, back here on the continent, more than 40 people have died after a dam burst following heavy rains and flooding all the way in Kenya. Officials say homes have been swept away and roads cut off after the dam burst in Kamuchiri village in the western part of the country. Local media reports say rescue teams continue to dig through the mud in search of survivors in the village near the small town of Mai Mahiu, about 60 kilometers from the capital, Nairobi. Elsewhere, volunteers and residents in the east searched late on Sunday for missing people after a boat capsized. The vessel carried dozens of people after the Tana River, the country's longest, burst its banks. Survivors in Garissa County were brought to the Buratana nursing home. In the meantime, the death toll from devastating floods last week in Kenya as well has risen to 123, forcing the government to postpone the reopening of schools by a week. Initially, schools were scheduled to open for the second term today, but will now open on May 6th. According to the country's education minister, schools across the country have been adversely affected by the floods, and some schools are hosting displaced families. Authorities are warning the death toll is still likely to increase as the rains continue to pound the country. More than 130,000 people have been displaced by the floods, with dozens others reported missing. Much earlier, my colleague Layo Larinde spoke with Kenyan journalist Sarah Zatti about the situation there.
Thank you for having the show. Actually, as you put clearly, the situation is dire. It's bad because as we are speaking now, it's raining all over the country, especially in Nairobi. And so far, the number who have died, people who have died is more than now 150 since yesterday. Remember, today, where you said there were flooding somewhere called Mahiu, 14 bodies have been recovered and tens of people have been missing. Yesterday, as they put it very clearly, in Tana River, there were 1 people on the boat, 23 were rescued and the rest are missing. So, so far, they have recovered 2 bodies. Then in central Kenya here, there were also an incident of a landslide which killed 6 people. So the situation is dire actually as we speak.
So landslides, the dams bursting, schools having to delay their resumption. So many effects of this flooding we're seeing across the country. Help us understand, the specific nature of each incident. How many people, are still yet unaccounted for?
As I put it very clear, tens of people are missing because the incident where a dam burst last night, it swept through almost 100 homes, assuming each home has 4 people. Those are 400 people. So far, the people have been rescued. There are almost 120. So we can say almost 100 others are missing because the bodies which have recovered, these are 48, and the numbers are increasing. When we go to Tana River, the northern part of the country, there was a boat which capsized. It had 43 people, 23 people were rescued, so we can say 20 are missing because 18 are missing because 2 bodies were recovered this morning. In central Kenya here, where we said 6 people had died in a landslide, the many cows are missing, and then the domestic animals are missing. So you can imagine the situation how it is as we stand because going downstream to the coast, the situation is also dire. People are marooned in our homes. People are marooned in towns. There's no food supply there. So the situation is going to be dire in the coming days because people are relying on roads to connect for food, to connect for home, to connect to other places. Schools have been closed. The reopening has been postponed. So it means that they have to monitor the situation to see how it's going. But as we stand, the meteorological department is saying that the rains are going to continue until May. So it's an issue of waiting and see what's happening next.
Staying with the World Economic Forum in Saudi Arabia, that's where Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has recently defended his decision to remove fuel subsidy in the country, maintaining it was necessary to avoid going bankrupt as a nation. President Bola Tinubu was speaking during a panel session on global collaboration, growth and energy for development alongside President Paul Kagame of Rwanda and other world leaders. He says his vision is to reset the country's economy and create a new pathway for growth. Our correspondent, Narela Sisi, has more.
Amidst deepening geopolitical tensions, tight financial conditions, and mounting debt pressures, world leaders in government, business, and the academia gather in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, for a special meeting of the World Economic Forum. The focus is on global collaboration, growth, and energy for development.
As the chairman of the ECOWAS,
speaking during the opening plenary, which focused on a new vision for global development, President Bola Tinubu outlined the steps his administration has taken to reform and reset the Nigerian economy for growth.
Concerning the question of the subsidy removal, there's no doubt that it was a necessary action for my country not to go bankrupt. One, to reset the economy and the pathway to growth. It is going to be difficult, but the hallmark of leadership is taking difficult decisions at the time it ought to be taken decisively. That was necessary for the country. Yes, there will be blowback. There is expectation that the difficulty in it will be felt by a greater number of the people. But once, I believe it was their interest that is the focus of the government. It is easier to manage and explain the difficulties. Along the line, there is a parallel arrangement to really cushion the effect of the subsidy removal on the vulnerable population of the country.
He also drew the attention of the world on the need to ensure peace, stability, and economic growth is entrenched in the Sahel region.
Without the big influence of Nigeria to discourage unconstitutional change of government. Equally, we have eased the sanctions. We need to trade with one another, not fight each other. It is very, very necessary and compulsory.
Other members of the panel added their views on steps that must be taken to reignite development and economic cooperation across the world.
If you look at it from the perspective of the global shocks that we talk about here and there, irrespective of where they have come from, all countries in the world are affected. Of course, some affected more than others. But that's fine. But that is a reminder that we need to, therefore, look at what has been talked about, the inclusiveness that we are talking about, and collaboration that brings different entities of the world together. We must be able to call out hypocrisy for whenever we see it, and it is there because we keep talking about North-South divide or other divides, but we don't find easily and quickly the solution to that.
Trade and financial flows are the transmission lines of prosperity, and it would be a huge mistake to lose them. So focus on that. Reforms pay off very, very well. So if we can have that leadership strength within countries to do the right thing and across countries to work together, the optimists in the room would say we are right. Optimism is well-grounded.
The conclusion at the panel discussion is that the issue of inclusivity must be central to a new vision of global development. And that vision, they say, must involve urgent and concrete action. From Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, Narela Sisi for Channels Television News.
Well, back home, the Netherlands was extremely pleased to play host to President Bola Tinubu in the country last week, as the last time a Nigerian president visited the Netherlands was in 2018. Mr. Michel Dielan, the Consul General, was speaking in an exclusive interview with Channels Television. He also commented on the economic reforms in Nigeria, which he says will take a while to yield results.
Sure, but let me first say that we were extremely honored and happy and pleased to receive Mr. President. It's not every day that you receive a Nigerian president. The last visit of President Buhari was, I think, 2017. And so we really did our best to make him feel welcome. He had lunch with the Prime Minister. He had dinner at the Royal Palace. We talked a lot about substance, and there was also a meeting with the business community. You asked me a question about the reforms. Reforms are never easy. That's why they're called reforms. You have to change the system in a certain way, and systems are difficult to change because there are always powers that be that have an interest in keeping these systems as they are. So I think everybody thinks that it was very, very brave of President Tinubu to make the decisions he did at the beginning of his tenure on the exchange rate and on the fuel subsidy. Of course, we can complain, and we will, that the price of fuel went up, but surprise, surprise, the consumption of fuel went down by 30%. And that is not just because we drive less, that is because there's less smuggling. And that smuggling was basically Nigerian taxpayers' money disappearing into neighboring countries by exporting subsidized fuel. So I think it was a good decision to put an end to that. And of course, we have the negative side effects, the increase of prices, and the inflation as a result of that. The other important decision was the exchange rate. And I think the exchange rate still needs to find a point of stabilization. Since March of this year, I think we have been relatively stable. Just last week, there was a spike, and I don't know why, but markets, they move in mysterious ways sometimes, or there was distrust, or I don't know what the issue was. But I hope that we can remain on a certain level, and that would sort of bring down the inflation in Nigeria.
You can watch more of the interview with the Consul General, Michel Dielan, on Diplomatic Channel. It airs tonight on UK Sky 515 at 8:30 and on DSTV 420 at 11:30 p.m. or on youtube.com/channelsweb. It's voting day in Togo as citizens participate in delayed parliamentary and regional elections amid tensions over a new constitution extending the president's term. About 4 million voters will choose 113 lawmakers and 179 regional deputies who, along with municipal councillors, will install a newly created Senate. Opposition parties argue that the reform passed by lawmakers last week is a ruse to keep President Fauna Singbe, already in his 4th term in power. The change allows him to remain president until 2031, critics say, after which he could be appointed to the new position of President of the Council of Ministers, in effect, Prime Minister, continuing his family's 57-year rule. Some critics have voiced skepticism about the credibility of the election after authorities temporarily stopped election accreditation for foreign press. The Conference of Togolese Catholic Bishops, which criticized the reform, was also blocked from deploying election observers. The South African government's microeconomic model and policies are flawed and highly incompetent. So says the chief economist of efficient group Dawie Root, who says the country faces high inflation due to load shedding. He's emphasizing that the government's mismanagement of state-owned enterprises, especially Eskom, is significantly impacting the nation's economy and discouraging foreign investment.
No fundamental reason why inflation and therefore interest rates are relatively high in South Africa is simply because South Africa does not have a very competitive macroeconomic environment. And if you don't have a very competitive macroeconomic environment, your country also becomes unattractive for international and local investments. So South Africa is not a very attractive place to invest. And if you do not invest a lot in your economy is not growing, there's not enough competition, there's not much wealth creation, and all those wonderful things. And the reason why that is so is because of the South African government, mostly. The South African government believe in the wrong ideology, they've got the wrong policies, and in many instances, the South African government is highly incompetent. And of course, in many instances, there's a lot of corruption as well. So I can show many examples of wrong macroeconomic policies in South Africa. Eskom is only one example. Because of Eskom, we've got high inflation and rising inflation, and because Eskom is as it is because of the way the ANC government mismanaged Eskom and other state-owned enterprises and ran it into the ground financially and operationally. There are many other examples. Because the police force is not working properly, people feel unsafe in South Africa, they don't invest, they don't do business. And there are many, many examples. So the reason for high inflation, the reason for high interest rates, the reason for weak economic growth is simply because of a government that's causing immense damage to the South African economy. So we need to fix those things before the Reserve Bank will be in a position, and certainly they will be in a position to lower interest rates, but then we have to fix the damage that was caused by the ANC government.
Now, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa affirms the Freedom Charter has provided a distinct roadmap for the aspirations of young South Africans. His remarks came as part of the National Freedom Day festivities held at Pretoria's Union Buildings. This year commemorates the 30th anniversary of the nation's inaugural democratic elections, signifying the conclusion of apartheid governance. Mr. Ramaphosa underscores that 1994 marked the restoration of dignity for all South Africans.
South Africa, our country, changed forever. It signaled a new chapter in the history of our nation, a moment that resonated across Africa and across the world. After casting his first ballot, President Nelson Mandela described that day as the beginning of a new era, moving from pessimism and division to nation building, reconciliation, and hope. The advent of democracy in 1994 ushered in a constitutional order that is premised on equality, freedom, human rights for all. On that day, the dignity of all the people of South Africa was restored. Over the course of 3 centuries, the dignity of the black people of this country had been deliberately and cruelly denied, first by colonialism and then by apartheid. Millions of black South Africans, African, colored, and Indian, were at the mercy of laws and practices that were enforced to serve the interests of a white minority. Their land was taken away, their assets were taken away, their labor was exploited, their prospects were stunted, running like a malevolent thread through these many forms of oppression.
Now, the country's Consul General to Nigeria, Professor Bobby Monroe, says Africa has a lot to gain if it comes together to harness resources and potential to enhance its common and shared interests instead of focusing on competing with each other. He was making the remarks at a public lecture examining the bilateral relations between Nigeria and South Africa over the last 30 years.
Formal diplomatic relations between Nigeria and South Africa began in 1994, and both have endured a complex but long history of kinship with remarkable progress, yet with serious existential challenges. Despite these challenges, the Consul General of South Africa to Nigeria, who was the guest lecturer at this public lecture held at Bowen University in Osun State, believes there's cause to celebrate 30 years of unbroken diplomatic relations between the two countries.
Although South Africa and Nigeria...
He notes that the challenges of inequality, poverty, unemployment, and insecurity are some of the inhibiting factors to the actualization of national unity and social cohesion for these two African nations.
The story is that the relations between South Africa and Nigeria are significant for both countries' international relations engagement and edged in the very strong foundations of a shared common history of colonialism. Firstly, in Africa, they are amongst the two biggest economic giants, but they also carry the burden of ensuring that they both support the countries of the continent to grow their economies and reduce unemployment, poverty, and inequality.
With at least 36 agreements negotiated and signed to facilitate and strengthen economic and political relations, promote trade opportunities and social cohesion, this public lecture seeks to promote seamless trading opportunities and smooth political and cultural integration.
South Africa and Nigeria are the two continental giants, and one thing that we cannot continue to do is to compete with each other. We rather collaborate and make use of our complementarities in order to make sure that we spearhead the process of industrialization in Africa successfully. Because the rest of the continent relies on our competencies, it relies on our GDPs, it relies on our populations.
A professor of international relations who chairs the lecture is excited at the insights provided by the lecture and hopes it will help improve diplomatic ties between Nigeria and South Africa.
The gaps is just in the perception, and I believe that with this kind of education we have today, it's likely that we will continue to define the relationship properly with the cooperation rather than the conflict and competition.
Sharing similar sentiments, the management of Bowen University is optimistic that the lecture provides a pathway to bridging identified gaps and hopes that the benefits from diplomatic kinship will be mutual going forward.
Most foreigners living in Nigeria have been having quite a good time, which has not been the same thing in South Africa, and I think that is the major one that probably the South African government may need to look at.
The shared history and ties between Nigeria and South Africa have been marked with volatility and tension in recent years. This public lecture seeks to change in the narrative by erasing mutual suspicion and promoting trust and mutual respect for a more prosperous and peaceful diplomatic union between both countries.
In its support for Palestine and Israel.
Staying with bilateral ties, diplomats from Nigeria and the United States have converged on the banquet hall of the State House in Abuja for the 6th session of the Nigeria-U.S. Binational Commission. The Nigeria-U.S. Commission was inaugurated in 2010 to serve as a strategic dialogue designed to expand mutual cooperation across a broad range of shared interests between the two countries. It is also a collaborative forum to build partnerships for tangible and measurable progress on issues critical to their shared future. The partnership cuts across economy, security, health, and technology. The two-day event in Abuja is aimed at reviewing the diplomatic relations between Nigeria and the U.S. for mutual benefits and development of the two countries.
We have two halls on the ground floor.
In the program this hour, Aisha Goswami is just 9 years old, but she's become a hit sensation on the internet after a video showcasing her incredible weightlifting skills went viral on social media. There she is, just strength traded. In the video, the young girl from Panchkula, Haryana in India is seen warming up and performing heavy weightlifting at a gym with the help of her father and coach. The girl's official best won a record in Asia with 60 kilograms, according to the India Book of Records. Aisha's journey into weightlifting began during the 2020 COVID-19 lockdown, when her father's gym had to close down and she joined her parents in their home workout routine. Aisha achieved the record for the youngest deadlifter at the age of 6. She lifted an impressive 45 kilograms, and the India Book of Records officially confirmed her accomplishment on December 28, 2021. She's well on her way to achieving a world title. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.